Okay, good morning. It's Thursday, and I'm going to talk to you about vulnerability and shame. And I don't know why I have never heard of Brene Brown before in my life, but this week I did. And I am blown away about what I've learned um, from her. It's something that I think I've talked about a lot in my podcasts or in my videos or whatever I've done um, for my grieving families, but I never really understood I guess, the psychological aspect of it. I knew what grief did to me, and I knew what I felt and what my parents have, told me that they felt. Um, but I didn't know, like, there was a study of shame and vulnerability, and I didn't know, like, this was actually a thing. And when I started listening to her TED Talks and her Netflix, I guess you go, video talk, whatever you call it, I was really blown away because it was like everything that I have felt, everything that I have witnessed in my own grief and in other people who are grieving. But I didn't put a name on it. I didn't really get it. I just thought that there were so many judgments associated with grief, which there is, but there's actually a name for it: shame and vulnerability. And Brene goes and she researches it. So a lot of this material that I'm going to cover today is on her research. So by all, I'm not. This is not something that I've done personally. Research. I'm just putting a name to what I've felt, and Brene opened this door for me to share and to be vulnerable with you with how I felt. A lot of people confuse where I am today to where I was 10 years ago. Um, Even a little bit further, Talon passed away in 2005, but I had a delayed reaction to grief because Emma was so sick. And so not until she died did I really start grieving. So it would be 10 years in September. And a lot of what I'm going to share with you to some people who currently know me is probably kind of shocking, to say the least. And I am fearful for what others think whenever I talk about it. But one of the things that God has shared with me through prayer is that when I was praying, like, God, why me? And He was like, because I need someone who has been through all of this, who has not been accepting of my will initially, who has battled with darkness and who has resurrected. And I was like, okay, so I'm to be able to open up to you, I have to expose my wounds. Like when Christ enters the upper room and He shows His hands. It's not to say that it didn't mean that, like doubting Thomas, that it didn't happen. What Christ does is He shows His wounds for us to show our wounds. So if I am trying to walk with you through all of this, why would you be willing to show your wounds to me if I'm not willing to show my wounds to you? It's an invitation. It's a safety. It's saying that I'm here and I'm here to bring peace. Like, we want to walk with you through the darkness. And the only way that you can feel like you can safely do that with us is if we are vulnerable with you. And I feel like a lot of the reasons why people aren't vulnerable with each other, it goes straight from what Brene talks about. It's because we are shamed. We're shamed by how we reacted. We're shamed that we weren't Marian and silent under the cross. I can remember, and I've only told this to a few people. I was in Emma's hospital room screaming at the top of my lungs because I was so mad at God. Like, how could you do this to me again, Lord? Like, how? This was not the God that I knew. And a wise priest told me, people who have never questioned God has never had the opportunity. And so here I was asking all the questions. And he was silent. So how do you react to that? More anger, right? I was so angry, yelling, crying, screaming. I threw up because the pain was so intense. And if you look now at, how far we've come, it is not by just accepting what happened, because that took an awful a lot of time. In fact, still during spiritual direction, I've told Deacon Ken, Deacon Ken, like, my heart knows, my head, let me back up. My head knows what I need to do for my heart to heal, but they are not in line. My heart hurts. And he told me, he said, Kelly, he said, your head and your heart will never be in line until you get into heaven. And that day when he left, I said, okay, God, like, I am going to suffer for the rest of my life. But it is painful to suffer alone. And I don't want to walk alone in my grief. And the only way that we can do that is if we open up ourselves and if we're vulnerable to others. Brene talks about when she did that TED Talk in Houston and how it was a spiritual awakening for her. She said she had a mental, an emotional, and spiritual meltdown. And I feel like that's what happened to me in the year of 2016. We had some family issues that came up, and I won't touch into that today, just because it hurt a lot of our family. But what I do want to talk to you about is how that, on top of losing Isley, my friend Misty, lost Isley, and I tried to enter into empathy. I tried to go into her dark tunnel with her. That was an awakening for me. Because whenever I got in that hole with her, and I told her, like Brene talks about, like the most powerful words, me too. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to help her. I was in that hole with her, and I felt like I went back like 6 years to that time that I was in the hole, my own hole, by myself. It wasn't until that time when I said, God, like, I cannot do this by myself. But I was not accepting at first. I was the one that stood on the outside of the door and no one could get in. No one. Like, you would talk to me about God, or you would talk to me about, and I would totally shut people down, because you don't know what you're talking about if you haven't lost a child. Like, I said it to everybody. You cannot help me. You cannot. And it was almost like, how dare you try? That is very humiliating to say today, that I blocked everyone out of my life that possibly could have helped me. But I needed another mother to walk with me through this. I would not accept help from other people who hadn't lost a child. Shut down, total shutdown. I've been so angry that this is funny. Ryan will appreciate me sharing this with you, because he's probably like, I'm waiting to the day till you actually told people you did that. We had went to a concert in New Orleans, and I drank too much. And for no reason whatsoever other than my suffering was so suffocating, drowning in the deep end, that I threw my boot at him for no apparent reason, no reason at all. It's kind of crazy. I feel that way by myself. But that is how low I got. Like, taking out my anger on the person that I love the most. I took out my anger on him, the person that I love the most. And that's what happens whenever you don't get help from someone who has walked. You go down this dangerous path. And I say dangerous because we did not start off this way. Like, it was silly how much we loved each other. And I can remember, like, before we got married and right after we got married, like, people would literally, like, look at us and say, oh my gosh, y'all are so in love. And we were. I was so in love with my husband. And then we lost our children. And it changed who we were. It changed our souls. It changed how we looked at life. It changed how we responded to the world. It changed how we talked to each other, how we loved each other, how we parented. It was life altering. And if you're watching this and you've never lost a child, it's hard for people to actually listen to these words, knowing that this can happen, and understanding how easy that can happen. Like, there is nothing that either one of us did that triggered this, the way that we treated each other. It was unwanted, unneeded, really, because we needed to love each other and grow with each other and heal with each other. But that's not what happened. It's not what happened. I worked so hard at masking my grief. I worked so hard at it that I became so good at it. Really, really good at it. I appeared so strong to people. I can remember people coming up to me and telling me, you are so strong. You've not only done this once, you've done this twice. And, here I am comforting people at Emma's funeral, and they're telling me this, and I did not feel like that. I did not feel strong. I felt like I was surviving. Yes, I did. I felt like I was drowning. I felt anger. I was numb. I was shocked. And not many people saw how raw that actually became until they stopped showing up. And that's where Redbird goes. We go with you when people stop showing up, because they start to see, oh, she's not as sad as she should be. She's not as weak as I expected her to be, or him to be. Like, they're doing okay. Well, I'm here to tell you all that I was not okay. I was not okay. I was masking my weakness. I was masking my vulnerability. I was so shameful of how I felt. And I portray this in a light that a lot of what I've done, a lot of how the way I reacted to my loss was because of how I was raised. My mom was diagnosed with bipolar when I was born. It was very, tough to grow up in a household where I was responsible for a lot of things that most kids aren't. So when you see me out and about being a Martha, that's all I've ever known. It is incredibly hard for me to be a Mary. So hard for me that at Cursillo, God sat me at St. Mary Magdalene's table. And he said, sit and learn, because you need a lot of learning. And I'm laughing. It's just how I find humor in me being so resistant to God entering in my heart that he smack dabs me, plants me, knocks me over the head, gives me all these things I shouldn't know. He does that to me because how else will I do it for myself when I'm so unwilling? And I have been for so long. I mean, he watched me suffer. He watched me suffer tremendously for more than 7 years before I was able to open my heart. So if you're beating yourself up because you've never wanted, never desired, and maybe you still don't desire to get help, I understand. I really do. I sympathize and I empathize with that tremendously, because me too. Like Brene says, that's the most powerful words. Me too. I felt that. I am not walking with you guys from a place that I was able to do this on my own. I was not. I am walking with you guys in a place where I saw all these fears, all these anxieties. I've walked in the trenches. I've walked in the dark. I've been angry at God. I told God I've hated him. And I really meant it. And then instantly lived with guilt for those 4 words. I was shameful that I said it, because that is not what Christianity is. And I knew that because I was a Christian. I was so angry at myself for being so angry at God. And it's so hard whenever I hear all these stories of people who have heard comments about, thank God that you didn't experience this. Or like Brene says, I forget exactly how she talks about it, but basically like offering sympathy with those words that, just talk about how thank goodness you didn't experience, or thank goodness you're not feeling. And it's like it wrongly names, and it does not validate how we feel. Like it almost puts us to where we feel like we're an anti-Christian if we feel this way. And I'm not tolerant much, and I'm working on that, of those comments. I'm not. I'm coming today to give a voice to all the mothers who can't even put to words how they feel, because it's so hard to even talk about how we feel. The minute we think one thing, it's like a tornado funnel. We start with, oh my gosh, I can't talk about it. Well, then I must be weak. I must be, it's a spiral. I must be going crazy. Like that was how I felt. I felt like I was going crazy. Like put me in a straitjacket. Like I need medicine. I must be like my mom. Like that was where my mind went. Because I couldn't walk down that path like Mary. I felt like I was undeserving of God's love. I felt that I could never be like the Blessed Mother if I couldn't imitate her perfectly. And through everywhere where God has led me to believe, that one thing that he told me that one day was, you are Mary. You are her. It was validating for me, because in that moment, I knew that I could be like her through him. I could be graceful through my suffering, as hard as it is, with the help of him and prayer and daily prayer. Who wants to wake up crying every morning? Who wants to go to sleep with mascara all over their pillow? I've washed so many pillowcases full of mascara. Can't tell you how many. Because I put so much effort into masking how I truly felt. When I would lay down at night, I would cry myself to sleep. I was exhausted. Let me rephrase that. It was exhausting, and I was exhausted. trying to hide my pain because I was so ashamed. Brene talks about vulnerability, that it's not weakness. And the myth of that is profoundly wrong. Because what it does to us mothers who have loss is it sets you up for failure because you try to be something that you're incapable of being. You're incapable of being sad. Wait, did I say that right? Of not being sad. You're incapable of not being sad that your child died. I don't know one mother that I've ever met who was okay with their child dying, who never shed a tear. I don't know that. I don't even believe that Mary didn't shed a tear. I think she was silent through her tears. And I know that because of the depiction of, our Mother of Sorrows, looking up at God with tears streaming down her face. She was perfect. She was without sin. And she was sad. And so I'm going to ask you a question, and really truly think about how you have felt through your suffering. Do you view vulnerability as weakness? Think about it. Have you held back because you have felt that by showing emotion that you were weak? Think about that. I live that every day. I lived it until I couldn't live it no more because I felt like I was dying inside. And I'm sure that the majority of us in one way or another has felt that way. Like if you put yourself out there, if I meet someone new and I have to share my story, I'm going to X, Y, and Z. I'm going to be the tunnel. I don't know how many of you know this about me. I do not like going to the graveyard. Everyone grieves differently. For me, it is the trigger place of my anxiety. It is the trigger place of my emotional havoc. It's this to me. I don't like going there. And then I feel guilty because I need to go and replace their flowers. I need to go and just pay my respects. Like this is real for me. This is 10 years after Emma died and 14 years after Talon's passed away. This is still real for me today. I still struggle with this. She also talks about to be vulnerable, to let ourselves out there, that is weakness. She talks about that, but she said it's the actual opposite. To put ourselves out there, to be vulnerable, is to be seen, and that takes great courage. But how many of us desire to be seen by our Father, to be seen by God? All of us. Look at the little kids. Like Estelle's always, Mom, watch me. Dad, watch me. We have this deep, deep, deep desire to be seen by the Father. No matter what we do, we cannot muffle that at all. And when we are vulnerable, it gives birth to change. So when you put yourself out there, something's going to happen. It can be the opposite of what you want to happen, but something's going to happen. But the more we put ourselves out there, and I'm not telling you to go and to put yourself out there and to talk to people who haven't experienced loss. That is terrifying for so many people. I'm talking about putting yourself out there with other grieving families to journey together. Start there. You have to start there. My mission is so everyone, no matter if you've lost or not, could understand to some capacity what the loss of a child does. Because I feel like there's so many people who put timelines. Okay, well, you can be sad for this X, Y, and Z, 6 months, whatever that timeline is, a year. Mine was kind of like 5 years. My family, and I love all of you if you're watching this dearly, but I felt personally, no one's ever came out and said this to me, but I felt that was like kind of the mark where they were like, okay, like we need some healing to start to happen. And not in a bad way. Like, I would never say that my family came and, you know, was rude to me or ugly to me, but I think it was kind of felt on my end. My end probably more than anybody else's end, that was a kind of a timeline for me. Like, it was time to get my stuff together. I kind of even said, like, Kelly, it's your time. It's time. So I kind of put those own expectations on myself as well. Was I ready? No, I was not ready. Although I needed it, because I felt like there was a point in time where if I didn't take that step and be vulnerable, I don't know where my marriage would have gone. And I say that like our workshops, they're marriage workshops. We're trying to keep marriages together. Not that there's anything wrong with your marriage if you're grieving. I'm not saying that ever. Never. But the statistics are that people get divorced higher than people who haven't lost a child. The statistics are higher. Deacon Barney talks about like it's the number one cause of divorce in America. I don't know where he got the research from, but he's been doing counseling and support for parents who've lost children a lot longer than I have, and so he has that research available somewhere. I'll find out maybe in another talk. But I'm not saying that you come to our workshop because you're married. Marriage, I can't talk, is on the verge of divorce. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying come to our workshop so we can give you all the tips and tools that we know, that we've learned, that we've walked, that we've journeyed to grow and strengthen your marriage. And, some people might come whose marriage is suffering tremendously. And this might be the saving point, but I'm not, by all means. We do not use the sacraments as an ER. We use the sacraments as a gym. And this is nothing different. We're coming together in the sacrament of our marriages for healing. It's the invisible grace that God gives us through the sacrament of our marriage. And we have to be willing to talk about it. Brene talks about vulnerability, and vulnerability creates. So she says that to create is to make something that never existed before. And that does not happen unless we're vulnerable. So what happens in grief when we're vulnerable and we put ourselves out there, or we allow people, and most importantly, God, to come into our heart. Like the song, He makes beauty out of our ashes. He recreates us, just like He did to the body of Christ. He recreates it. She also talks about how hard it is to actually get there and to release what's inside. And I just wrote, I don't know if you guys like truly understood, like I talked to you about before, how stuck, how isolated, how dark my world was when I was in my trenches, and where I am today. Brene's book, Daring Greatly, came off of a quote from Theodore Roosevelt, and I'm going to read it for you. And just to let you know, I have a bunch of notes right here, so if you keep seeing me looking down, that's what I'm doing. So the man in the arena. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles, or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, I cannot talk. You're going to know that about me pretty soon. Words don't come out correctly. So let me go back. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he falls, at least falls while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. That is incredible, and I have never heard that before. And that is what this ministry is about to me. It's not about waiting until you are in that perfect place to come into the arena, because we have got to accept that there is never going to be perfect in grieving. There's never going to be a place where we're going to feel like we've got it right, that we're truly resurrected and glorified, because that doesn't happen totally until we get to heaven. I feel like there is a lot of resurrection in our grief, a lot of redemption done by Christ, but our perfect bodies will not exist until we get to heaven. So we can't wait until that perfection happens. We have to get into the arena. And that's what the ministry is to me, because I am not perfect. I am not in heaven. I've been resurrected because I put myself into the arena unwillingly, a lot of times. And I'm just going to say that again, unwillingly. I've done so much unwillingly. I have cried. I have battled my way through my healing. So I heard a quote the other day, and it said, when God's disciple or God's soldier goes down on her knees, that's when the battle has just begun. That is vulnerability. Getting on your knees. And sometimes our vulnerability comes in small little doses. It's about taking that step to sign up to a workshop that we offer, or a retreat, or when we have our mentor program created, which should be early next year, by signing up to do it. The whole mission of Redbird is to be able to minister to parents who are grieving. That's the whole mission of the ministry. And what I've found that is the most comfortable for families is in their home. So this mentor program is going to allow a mentor couple to go in your home, or you can go into their home. It's whatever is the most comfortable for you. And to journey together with like losses. So a stillbirth can journey with a stillbirth family together in the comforts of their home. It's just you four. And there's something that's so comforting knowing that I can do this. I can do a program like this in the comforts of my home. Okay, so I'm going to go now, and I know I've been doing this probably for about 30 minutes, and you're probably tired of seeing me or hearing me talk, but we're going to talk about shame. So shame prevents us from going into that arena because we feel judged by the critic. We feel people don't understand us. We feel so much judgments, and rightfully so, because you've heard those comments. You've heard all those comments before. At least you have another one. At least you have, that's what Brene says. She said, the difference between sympathy and empathy is sympathy starts the sentence with at least, and empathy actually climbs down the stairs and goes into the dark with you and says me too. So the critics, those who start those sentences with at least. I don't really believe that people do that intentionally. I wholeheartedly don't believe that people do that intentionally because they're uneducated. That's what they do instead of just hugging you and saying, me too, or I love you, I'm here, or I don't know what to say, but I support you, I love you, I just want to be here for you. But the critic, we're going to talk about the critic. A lot of times when we're in, if we allow ourselves to put ourselves in the arena and we look up, she says 99.9% of the time the critic that we're staring at is ourselves, which was mind-blowing to me because we are sometimes our own worst enemy. And we need the grace of God to be able to get through that, because I really feel like that's Satan. He wants to keep you in that shame, because that is the only way that you will not be resurrected and that the light will shatter your darkness. Okay, and she also talks about what our shame does to us about, and this is just my take on what she said, that we feel we will never find our healing, so why even try? I don't know if you've ever felt like that. Like, why? I will never be happy again. I will never find joy again. I will never be who I was before. And that last sentence is probably true. But I do believe that God will make something beautiful out of you that you would have never, ever been able to be without your cross, without your suffering, without knowing what it's like to suffer and struggle and fight for your healing. To me, I would have never chose this for my life. Ever. Never. But who I am today and who I was 14 years ago, I like her much better. So I was selfish. So selfish. I can remember, this was in college, working at a car dealership and people were pregnant. And they were complaining like, oh, I'm so sick. Oh, this. I'm so, I feel so bloated. Like, and I was like, oh my gosh, if these pregnant people complain one more day. I said this out loud. That's a shame. I feel so ashamed saying that, but this is true. I was like, oh my gosh, they need to stop complaining. That's how I felt. So much that when I got pregnant, I threw up every single day. Every day. That was God, like, He knows how to give it to me. If you say that you're not going to do something, this is me. If I say that XYZ's like God, He totally shows me. I put my foot directly into my mouth. Okay, and so the second thing, and if we start to feel joy, so once we get to that point where we're able to feel joy, then we're doing our children's memory a disservice or an injustice, and then we feel the guilt. It's a spiral, all out. This is what shame does to us. And she talks about shame, and this is not just in grieving, so I'm going to read some of these things, but this is some of the things that that correlates to shame. So not everyone's going to feel these things, not everyone's going to experience these things, but this is from her study, Brene Brown's study, about shame, some of the symptoms that shame's correlated to. So addiction, depression, violence, aggression, anger, bullying, suicide, eating disorders. And she lists more. But she said guilt. So being able to say, I am sorry. I did this too. And maybe I'm saying that a little wrong, but work with me. It irreversibly correlates the opposite of those things. And shame is adaptive. I know for me, not being able to accept my crosses and to be the Christian that I was raised and taught to be, I felt that I couldn't be one or the other. Like, I felt like I couldn't be angry at God and love Him. I felt that I couldn't be in communion with God and hate what he did to my life. And I say hate what he did to my life because God does not do that to you. But I'm just saying, like, this is the thought process that I actually had. So this is what my brain sent to my heart, and I believed it. I believed it, and I wholeheartedly felt that if I couldn't accept my losses, that I was not a Christian. I felt that way. And I feel like a lot of faithful people who have not lost a child sometimes contributed to that. And that might be a hard statement to say out loud. And it could be the way I perceived it. I'm not going to say that it was their intention ever. But it happened to me. It did. And I thought, if I didn't suffer perfectly, like I said, I could not be Marian. I could not be a lover of Christ who loves him so much like I do. I felt like I couldn't be one with and not be the other. And there was so much shame and so much guilt that added layers that I've had to work on probably just as long as all the other things that I've been working on in my healing. Shame for women is a web of, this is Albrene, unattainable conflicting expectations of who we are supposed to be. We feel that if we don't suffer, this is my part, if we don't suffer, like I said, like Mary, silently at the foot of the cross, then we aren't worthy of God's love. If we're not being obedient to his commands, like, there's a lot of scripture that says, do not lament. And probably just because we're not scripture scholars and we're not theologians and we're not, I really don't know much about, about theology. If we're not all of that, knowing all of that, I feel like there's a lot of times that we've misinterpreted what scripture tells us. And I know a lot of times that probably I have. But one thing that we need to focus on is God's love for us. There's a lot of things that we probably need to do, but if we focus on God's love, those things that we're supposed to do will come natural. If we focus on being in total communion with God, about loving him unconditionally like he loves us, and trying not to sin and trying to walk with grace through our suffering, even though we will stumble and fall, focusing on his light and his love, the other things will come natural to us. It might not be immediately. It might take years. But by focusing on that, I know for me, I was better able to live that way. I was better able to be the light to others when I started loving God like he loved me. It's a hard statement to dive into. Are we loving him like he loves us? Are we seeing ourselves through God's eyes? I don't think I did for a very long time. Sometimes I talk about my anger with God as, I chalk it up to being like this, sassy teenager. I am very sassy. But so was some great saints like St. Catherine of Siena. She was a sassy saint. And I know that about myself. I'm not as graceful as I'd love to be. I am not as silent as I would sometimes love to be. I sometimes open my mouth and poop comes out, if that's what you want to call it, I'm sometimes my worst enemy. But it's a daily prayer that I pray. I pray for trust. I pray for grace. I pray for strength. I pray for love. I pray for all the virtues that I desire, that I am constantly working on. And, like in scripture, it does talk about, as anger, There's holy anger. We see that when, Jesus went into the temple and he flipped the tables. That's holy anger. About being injustice to God, like unjustful or however you say it. It's not about being angry. It's about what we do with our anger. So if we fester and let that anger turn us into the Grinch or into doom and gloom, if we allow that anger to turn us into dark and not walking in the dark, sitting there just festering, then that's what they're talking about. Like, that's what we're talking about. And I've had to take that into confession because I've done that pretty often. By all means, like I said, none of this have I come to know about myself and come to say about grief. None of this comes from a place of reading stuff. This is stuff I've lived. This is stuff I've felt. This is the stuff that asking God, like, why me, Lord? Why? Who am I to tell people how to accept grief? Like, I did not accept grief at all. I did not. So this is looking at it, the majority through the lens of a woman, but Brene started interviewing men, and she talks about what she found out was, show me a woman who can sit with her husband in vulnerability and fear, and you will find a woman who has done incredible work. And then vice versa. Show me a man who has sat with his wife in vulnerability and fear, and I can show you a man who has done great, incredible work. And I thought about that in Ryan and I's marriage. A long time ago, through our grief, through our anger, whenever I would tell Ryan about an expectation that I had of him. So, like, let's say, like, I expect you, or I want you to bring me somewhere because I need to get away. I need you to do it, or, and then he wouldn't do it, and then I'd fuss. He would fuss back. Like, we were like fussing at each other. Probably not until about a year or two ago, when we really started working on our communication, did we realize if we just be vulnerable with each other in fear and say the hard things about what our heart truly felt, were we able to actually love each other through our loss? I had no idea the things that my husband went through his suffering, because he was silent. Shame on me for not asking. And I shame on him for not telling me also, though. It's a two-way street. But in humility, I sit here and I should have asked. I should have not been so self-focused. But my grief did that to me. I felt isolated in my marriage, in my grief, in my marriage. Because I was not willing to sit in vulnerability and fear, even in front of my husband, out of shame. I thought, largely because of the diagnosis my mother had, I thought largely because they would think that I had bipolar too, largely because of that. So I sheltered a lot of people in my own home from how I truly felt, because I was fearful. I felt shame for what I felt. I thought that I was going crazy. I thought that I was not normal. I thought this was not normal. And I think that's what the world speaks to you, is if you do X, Y, Z, if you cry a lot, if you lay in bed a lot, if you don't want to go home because your child died. My child did not die in my home. Either one of them. They both died in the hospital. And I did not want to go home. People associate all of that with, that's not normal. That is truly normal. It's truly normal to feel all of those things after you lose a child. Like, we're talking about the greatest loss someone will ever experience the greatest loss. It's the only words I could put to it. The greatest loss that a family will ever experience is the loss of a child. The greatest suffering someone will experience in their marriage is the loss of a child. That is why the divorce rate is so high. Okay. She also talks about like the difference between women and men. She lists the guy who did this research, but I'm going to focus right now just on the men. So in men, the 4 things that a man was expected to have was for him to be, I don't even know what the word is, successful, a real man, or however, we view men as. They're supposed to have emotional control. They're always supposed to put work first. They're always supposed to pursue status, violence, tough, strong. That was the four categories. Does any one of those 4 talk about humility? St. John Vianney talks about humility as the only virtue that Satan cannot mimic. I think the word mimic is. I think it's the word mimic. That is the only virtue that he cannot possess is humility. None of these talk about that. None of these. So who are we really trying to what critic, I guess that's the word, what critic are we looking to please? Are we looking to please the world? Because we're going to fail miserably. Because if this is what they expect us to be, I mean, none of this we can be in grief. None of this. So we're going to fail every time. We're going to fail every time if this is what we try to be. And we cannot help people in sympathy. We have to help people in empathy. Brene talks about shame as the epidemic of the world. And what grows shame, secrecy, silence, and judgment. She said if you put all those 3 in a petri dish and you put a dose of empathy, shame can't survive. Empathy is the antidote to shame. So climbing down that dark hole, standing on the ground and saying, me too, I'm going to walk with you through this, that is the antidote of shame. So if you want to truly help each other, if you truly want to walk with another family through grief, in your own grief too, like this is a 2-way street. Like I'm helping you and I'm receiving help. I go meet with mothers or Ron and I go meet with couples. It is a 2-way street. My vision, like on the road to Emmaus, like when God opened scriptures and he gave gave the disciples the ability to see him through that. This is what empathy does in grief. It opens your mind to all this healing that you don't even see happening. And if we're going to find our way back to each other, this is what Brene talks about, that vulnerability has to be that. And I'm gonna end with this because I think I'm over an hour. I'm gonna end with that I truly, truly, from the bottom of my heart, want for you to be able to walk in joy, to be able to feel the peace of Christ, to be able to know the love of the Father, to be able to understand how you can be all of those angry, you could be sad, you could be all of that and still love God, trust God, maybe not 100%, but you can still have some form of trust and pray daily like I do for grace, for strength, for trust, for strength. You can still be all of that and love God. Like you can still be faithful and be all of that. I give you permission. I give you permission to do that. I have been truly inspired by Brene Brown to share with you like all of what I've felt for so long and didn't really understand what it was, but it obviously is shame and vulnerability. I mean, when she goes back to that, shame and vulnerability, it's like the anchor. Well, no, it's like the ball and chain that holds us under the water. Shame. That's what it is. We need to get a chainsaw and cut that chain. We need to be vulnerable enough to go after our own healing. Like, what could happen? What's the worst thing that could possibly happen? Is that you have to try again, right? Go to another workshop. Go to another support group. Oh, well, I didn't find what I want here. One time, like once, you have to try again. You have to try. We have to pick the marbles out one by one by one. One by one by one. Sometimes they get put back. We have to keep one by one by one. It's 2 steps forward or 1 step forward, 2 steps back. That is what it is. Your journey towards healing, it's a lifetime. But I can't imagine a life without the people who were there for me. The relationships that I've made, the friendships that I've made. I can't imagine my life without these people who loved me through my loss. Some of them might have not even understood. They were there for me. They listened to me. They cried with me. Talk about that's something. That's truly, truly, truly something. So I hope today, I hope you've formed a sense of trust in me to walk with you through your loss. I hope that I've helped you to open doors that maybe you've closed and threw away the key for a long time. And I pray for you daily. I pray for all of you daily, really. All of our Redbird families. I pray that God will walk with you along and He will continue to make Himself known to you, especially in the breaking of the bread. He will make Himself known to you. He is not far. Just when you think He's the farthest, He's actually sitting next to you. He's trying to place you on His lap so that He can rub your head because He's crying with you. Our Lord and our Savior, He's crying with you. He's dragging His cross. Maybe that's not even what I'm supposed to say, but I'm not just going to say it with you. Like He is with you. And I'm with you. And I just want you to know how much I love you and how much I'm praying for you. And I just hope that you try to get yourself in the arena at one point or another. And if you find yourself watching this video and you desire that, my email address is Kelly, Kelly, @redbird.love. And our phone number is 337-223-2019. Leave us a message. We'll call you back. We want to journey with you. But you have to take the first step. You have to try to get into the arena. Because that's the only way. That's the only way that we can truly heal. So, I hope your day is good. And may God bless you each and every day.